Thank you, and happy West Virginia Day, everybody. Hope everybody is getting a pepperoni roll or ramps or whatever heritage food of your choosing today. My name is Emily Morrow. I work for W Extension as an agriculture and natural resources agent in Jefferson County. So I am in the easternmost county, and I was asked to jump in today to talk about pumpkins. And my co-teacher here is little Lucas Morrow. He's my son. He is home today. So if you see him pop in and out, he just needs a little bit of mommy time. We're battling a little ear infection today. So most of these pictures I have is actually from a pumpkin trial that I did several years ago that was in response to some of my growers over here, a lot of which are smaller and wanting to take organic control measures. We were actually looking at one of the common pests about pumpkins, which I'll talk about in a little bit once we get into the session. So I understand that Grow This has given some pumpkins across libraries, and many of you have likely and hopefully gotten your hands on some. So it's not too late to start growing some pumpkins. We'll talk a little bit about that. As with all vegetable crops, we want, or the variety of vegetable crops want an ideal soil pH between 6 and 6.8. I talked about taking a soil sample, I believe it was March or late February with this program as well. Pumpkins, like many vegetables, also need nitrogen to vine and turn green. And about 50 to 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre is what's recommended. We recommend when you're applying that much nitrogen to do it in split applications. So you would do about 50 pounds per acre at the time of planting, which comes out to be about 2 ounces per 100 square feet if you have a smaller area. And then you would do the other application of nitrogen about 30 days later, about halfway through the growing, depending on the variety. So with pumpkins, you want to direct seed them about 1 inch deep. You can transplant pumpkins, but it's one of those great things that you can just direct sow right into the ground. I love those types of crops because I am not very good at starting anything from seed, even in a sterile soil mix. I like to put things just directly in the ground. My kids like to jump in there and poke a bunch of holes in the ground and take their little trowels out as well. You want to do about 4 to 5 feet between plants, between the different rows. Some faster maturing varieties, as little as like 80, 90 days, that you can seed them as late as mid-July. But you do want to make sure you harvest them before the frost. Some of varieties are about 100, 115, 120 days. Those are going to be best seeded early. You can seed them into June, but you want to work backwards from your frost date to be able to figure the absolute latest that you can seed pumpkins. Pumpkins, like many, they're in the squash family, so they have a similar pests as squash, which we'll talk about in a few slides. So by seeding a little bit later, not only are your pumpkins coming to maturity a little bit closer to that Halloween time frame, but you're also avoiding some of the life cycles of many of those common pumpkin pests. So as tempting as it is, as soon as the ground is ready to work to get out there and plant some of these crops, there's actually an advantage to being a little bit behind in your schedule, like I usually am. If you're not familiar with your zone, West Virginia is kind of divided into 3 different specific zones that have various growing seasons. I'm over here in zone 3 over here in the Eastern Panhandle. So we have a 180-day growing season, which means we have an earlier frost-free date about mid-April and a later killing frost in mid to late October. So you would want to make sure that your pumpkins are going to be able to be harvested by around October 20th if you're in zone C, October 10th by zone B, October 5th by zone A, based on your earliest killing frost. Again, those aren't like hard and fast deadlines. We have had some years over here in the Panhandle where we didn't get a killing frost until well into November, but we've had other years where we have been early October where we've gotten that killing frost too. So if your pumpkins are extra late and they're not close to maturity by the time that frost comes, you're gonna have a little bit of green pumpkins or some things that maybe aren't as best suited for your purposes, of which there are many. So I understand the grow this variety is the Connecticut Field Pumpkin, which takes about 115 days to harvest. It's an heirloom variety. It grows to be about 15 to 20 pounds at the time of harvest, and it's distinctive because it has kind of that flat bottom, which helps it sit upright. It's a good carving pumpkin, good one to sit on your front porch from decorations as well. Most pumpkins are edible, but some varieties are sweeter than others. This is one that is considered to be edible, but just isn't as sweet as some. Some people like those different types of flavors. Others might want to prefer one that's a little bit sweeter, which I totally understand. I myself like dual purpose pumpkins because I like pumpkin seeds. I also like to eat pumpkin. It's not as sweet as, the canned pumpkin you get from the store that tends to be butternut squash, but it's a nice nutritious meal. Other suggested varieties from West Virginia, these were recommended by Dr. Lewis Jett, our commercial horticultural specialist. So if you're looking for those really, really giant pumpkins that are over 50 pounds, I'm originally from Tyler County, and we have a annual fall festival where people would always grow those giant pumpkins they have to haul in on a trailer, and those were always just the absolute coolest to see. I've always been interested in people that can grow pumpkins that big, and you need to get the skid steer out or the tractor with the bucket to load it, just to take it somewhere else. Those are the varieties: the Big Macs, the Atlantic Giant, the prize winner that we recommend for West Virginia. There's extra large, large. Most pumpkins that we grow tend to be in this medium, this medium range, which that PM next to them indicates that those varieties have some resistance to powdery mildew, which is a common pumpkin problem. You also have pie pumpkins, smaller pumpkins, miniature pumpkins, and colored pumpkins. Doesn't mean you can't grow other varieties that are not on this list. These are just ones that are just a little bit more well suited to our climate. I like the little pie pumpkins myself. I grew when we did a pumpkin trial. It's been about 3 years ago. We did Cinnamon Girl, which is a early maturing variety. It's about 90 days to maturity, and it's a good dual purpose pumpkin, and it cooked up really nicely. And those pumpkins were about 3 pounds, so they were pretty small. So pumpkins, like anything, always comes with a variety of problems. And if you've ever tried to grow anything in the squash family, you probably know exactly what I'm going to talk about. The first of which is the squash vine borer. Because pumpkins are in the same family as different squashes, they are susceptible to these. So you might have had these on your zucchini or on your yellow squash or on your acorn squash. It is a huge, huge problem with anything in that family. The adults are this red beetle with these black spots on them, and they're very active in June, but the adults are not making the damage. They are laying eggs at the base of the plant. The eggs are then hatching into the larvae that you see in this bottom picture down here, and then they are boring into the base of the plant, and they're boring into the stems to feed. They block the flow of water and nutrients and ultimately kill the plant. You can sometimes actually dissect these and get these out. Sometimes there's multiple larvae in a particular plant, so that might not be always feasible. Ways to get around squash vine borer: there are some chemical control measures. They have limited variability, very variable effective rates. So a research trial we did a few years ago was actually looking at organic control measures of this. Row cover is something that is moderately effective. Mulching the base of the plant too kind of confuses the adults a little bit. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to put row cover on any of these big vining plants like pumpkins, but it is not a fun time. I do not recommend doing it with your spouse either, because it's definitely going to cause some fights. And it doesn't stay on very well. You have to take it off when the plants flower, so then get pollinated, and then you got to put it back on. But those are options that can help, but rotating your plant seems to give the best control measures. So that's a couple pictures of what you'd be looking for at the base of the plant. That hole, you kind of get this orange frass that gets that as the larvae feed come out of the plant as well. So those are all symptoms, and you're probably going to first notice symptoms of your plant starting to wilt. Squash bugs are another really, really common pest. I'm just going to go over the kind of the most common pests, but there's certainly other things that can plague pumpkins. Squash bugs and squash vine borers are definitely the most detrimental. So the squash bugs are in different life cycles here. Here's a picture of what the eggs look like. They're usually on the underside of the leaves. These are the juvenile, the nymph squash bugs. They have two different little instar phases, and then the adults are a little bit bigger down here in the bottom picture. The eggs hatch in about 10 days, and if you have a really bad infestation, you will see tons of these little suckers of eggs. The squash bugs, when they're adults, they suck the sap out of the leaves. They cause yellow spots that then turn brown and wilting in the plants. So a lot of times, squash bug and squash vine borer damage can be easily mistaken for each other. Good control measures. There's more control measures for squash bugs. Hand squishing these eggs when you see them. You have a little bit of time if you're monitoring your plants daily, since it takes them about 10 days to hatch. Neem oil helps also stop the plants from feeding. 7 with the active ingredient carbo also provides some control as well. Always, always, always important to, that's not an exhaustive list of control, but always, always, always very important to read the label if you're using any chemical control measures. I advocate hand squishing in these situations because it's so satisfying to watch those little eggs squish. And sometimes you can get the adults as well. And our code word today is going to be squash bugs. Cucumber beetle is another variety that pest, and cucumber beetles can be striped or spotted. This picture shows a striped one. They will feed on flowers and foliage of anything in the squash and cucumber family. The striped beetles are more damaged because they can carry the bacteria that then cause bacterial wilt, which is really where their damage comes into play with pumpkins. Again, control measures here are row cover, neem oil, pyrethins also provide some measure of control. This is one of those very, very unique pests that it's not necessarily the feeding that always causes the most damage, but the fact that the bugs are carrying with them another disease, in this case, bacterial wilt. Powdery mildew is another one that we see really, really commonly, especially a huge issue if you are, or a potential issue if you're going to be planting your pumpkins way later in the season when we have more rainfall in the fall. It's caused by a fungus that favors humid conditions. You're going to probably see it in mid to late summer. Pale yellow spots are often the first sign, but then it comes as like powdery fungus that you'll see on the leaves. Sometimes sorry, I got the 4-year-old in here now. So white powdery spots form on upper and lower leaves, affecting fruit quality and the health of the plant. Seemingly appears overnight. I've seen it appear overnight in my zucchini and my yellow squash, pumpkins as well. And it's not a death sentence right away, especially if you're at the tail end of your growing season for your pumpkins. But it's something that can be purchased with some level of control measures, some level of resistance some plants have. All right, those are kind of the gist of it. So for something I didn't mention is for those of you that haven't planted pumpkins yet, it's not too late. I can plant pumpkins up until early July here in the Eastern Panhandle. Again, we have a slightly longer growing season than others, and those are going to be ones that have more of a 90-day mature rate. Days to maturity, and that even accounts for an extra 10 days for germination. I can be planting pumpkins up until July 4th. So if I had my hands on some of Connecticut field pumpkins, actually my earliest day to plant or recommended from our frost dates would have been yesterday. So feasibly you could take your chances and still get some pumpkins in the ground. It's a good crop to be able to do some succession planting. My kids love to paint them. We like to carve them. I like to cook them up as well. It's just one of those things that's a really, really fun thing to plant and can add some joy to your garden as well. Any questions?
I did drop the link for you guys to take the survey in the chat. If you guys have any questions for Emily, I think that was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate you jumping on, and we definitely needed some education about how to plant our pumpkins, so we appreciate it.
I do see Will says spotted lanternfly nymphs are a big problem in Berkeley County. Yes, Will, yeah, I see them everywhere. We make a game about squishing them. So if you're in a county that's been inundated with spotted lanternfly like we here in the Panhandle, we'll try not to share, but inevitably when we do share, the nymphs do feed on like annual vegetative material, like things on your garden crops. There's not enough evidence to suggest they do lasting damage. This is my personal opinion of what I've seen, but this is probably going to be our worst year for spotted lanternfly. And then after this year, because we've seen this trend happen in Pennsylvania and in Winchester and other areas that have seen it worse than us. This is going to be the year that birds and chickens and praying mantises and all these other things figure out they can eat them. So I think this is going to be our worst year for spotted lanternfly, and then we're going to start to see the population start to balance out. And you can squish them, but my goodness, those buggers are fast, aren't they?
Oh, any other questions for Emily? You guys do be sure to stick around. We're going to give a brief update here in a moment about the Grow This Throwdown, but feel free to ask Emily any questions you'd like about pumpkins while we have her on here. She's very knowledgeable. All right. Well, we appreciate it, Emily. I think this was awesome. And this will be recorded and we'll post it on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. So if you guys want to reference back to this after you get your pumpkins planted, it'll be available there. And you can ask us questions in the comments on that. And I can reach out to Emily and maybe she can help us out since she's knows more about it than I do for sure. So thank you, Emily.
Thank you.